Well, I just wanted to get you in the Christmas spirit, you know. Yeah. Even the Grim Reaper wants a present. I'm telling you. Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions here. How many of you decorated your tree the day after Thanksgiving? Okay, yeah, we did. How many of you still haven't put up any Christmas decorations or any tree at all? Oh my, you're real stick in the mud, aren't you? Good grief. Come on, man, I'll tell you what. Okay, so how many of you wait till the day before Christmas to put up a tree or decoration? Yeah, nobody? All right, cool. All right. So if you're just not going to do it, you're just not going to do it. Is that what I'm hearing here? Okay, all right, cool. Okay. Well, let me just welcome you to week number 1 of just a 2-part series called Scrooged. Okay? And we're going to be talking about some really cool stuff here in the next couple of weeks. And what we're going to be doing is, in this series, we're going to be talking about, we're really going to be taking a rather candid look at that very first Christmas. Because there's some things there that maybe we haven't seen before or didn't realize before, you know, things, traditions we've become used to, those kinds of things. Anyway, let me just welcome you to Grace Life here in El Paso. We're just glad that you're with us today. It is actually Christmas only like 5 days away, and it's going to be a good year. And as well as welcome all of you who are viewing us online, all over the United States as well as around the world. I want to just wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Really good to have you with us. So, excuse me, how many of you tend to have sort of a Scrooge-type attitude for Christmas? Anybody? Yeah, I see a couple of these out there, you know, for somebody else. You know, I was used to be one of those people that had kind of a Scrooged attitude about Christmas. Things have changed in the last year or so, and, you know, I'm really looking forward to Christmas this year. I think it's going to be a really great time, you know, and it's going to be awesome. You know, but there's a lot of people that really do have difficulties. I really appreciate Tammy praying about that this morning, because there's a lot of people that have difficulties during this time of year. Statistics actually show that the Thanksgiving Christmas season is one of the most, if not the most, physically demanding and emotionally draining seasons of the entire year. I mean, that's statistics that show that during this particular time of year, people are stressed out both physically as well as mentally. Well, I think we can see the reason for some of that, you know, because there's such pressure to, you know, buy things, and there's so much hustle and bustle and all that kind of stuff going on around us, you know. But, you know, there's no other holiday during the year that is marked by more depression and suicide and even random acts of violence than the Christmas and Thanksgiving season. It's just statistically that way. There's lots and lots of that stuff that goes on. And my guess, I mean, why is that? I mean, my guess is that there isn't any other holiday that is surrounded by more, you know, activity, frantic type of activity, like, you know, like Black Friday events and stuff like that, where people are just basically killing each other to save $30 on a, you know, $900 item or something. That's just crazy. And there's a lot of tradition. There's lots of rich food. There's lots of sweets. There's, you know, lots of stress from trying to find the perfect gift for that perfect person. And that the Thanksgiving, Christmas season is just like that. So, so what do you think? Is this just a modern day phenomenon? Is that something that only happens in this modern day? Or has Christmas always been kind of a stressful time? You know, it's something to think about. Something to consider, because I've always thought about Christmas as being, you know, that stressful time of year that only has taken place in modern times because of all the stuff that goes along with it, all the traditions and those kind of things that are there. But you know, when you think about that very first Christmas, most of us probably have, you know, visions of, you know, a really quiet night, not quiet, peaceful manger scene, twinkling stars in the sky, all those kind of things. But, I got to tell you that the idea that Jesus was born in a barn is really up my alley. I mean, I love barns. I do. Always have. I go by barns, and I look at barns everywhere in the country. I love to see pictures of barns on the internet, and even more than that, I like to be in a barn. Barns are a really great place to be. How many of you like to be in the barn? Yeah. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. If you've never been in a barn, and I'm not talking about a tool shed, although that's close, but no. A tool shed would be in farm country. It's usually called a tool shed, and that's where they keep all the heavy equipment, the tractors and all that kind of stuff. And I've been in those as well. I don't know if I should say this. Okay, it's confession time. When I was about 4 years old, that's not a confession, but I can remember when I was about 4 years old, and my dad was a pastor, and we went to visit one of the farmers there in Nebraska where we lived, a little tiny town by the name of Hayes Center. I think there may have been, 75 or 100 people living there possibly. I don't know if there's even that many. But we went out to visit one of these farmers one time, and we were all standing around out there in the tool shed, at where you park all the tractors and stuff. The grease on the floor and the dirt, all that kind of stuff, And I had to go pee, My Dad, I gotta go pee. He said, well, go for it, Really? Yeah. Oh, cool, Wow, that's awesome. You get to pee out in the barn? Wow, that's cool, Little boys would understand that. You ladies wouldn't. You wouldn't. Yeah. But I love the architecture of barns. I love, there's something about the smell and the feel of a barn that makes me feel warm all over. Even in the coldest winter, you can walk into a barn and it gives you kind of a warm feeling. I can't exactly explain it. Maybe it's the mixture of the hay with the animal smells and the pee and the poop and the dirt and all that stuff all mixed together just makes a smell that you can't get anywhere else. You just can't, And it's a wonderful smell, They need to bottle that, turn it into perfume, I think, Lee, if you'd wear that, I'd follow you. No, she said no. It's kind of like smelling new tires. That's almost the same thing, but no, not quite, No. But, it's just a smell you can't get anywhere else in the world, literally. Nowhere else has it. So, what about the very first Christmas then? Was the night on which Jesus was born that quiet manger scene that we think of, where sheep are laying around and, the babies are sleeping and the cattle are burping up their cud? I assume that's at least part of what it means when it says the cattle are lowing, I know cattle make that, there's kind of a deep, lowing sound that they make. But they also make this sound when they burp up the cud to chew on it, And that also adds kind of the ambiance and the smell and all that kind of thing. It's awesome. You wouldn't understand if you weren't raised that way or hadn't been out in the barn. But take my word for it. You've been missing something. Something really awesome, Wow. So for me, for Jesus to be born in the barn, wow. That's cool. I don't see that as being a detractor. I see that as being really pretty awesome, in my world. So, but what? From what I've read in the Bible, what I can see in the Bible about the peaceful manger scene where cattle are burping up their cud and sheep are laying around and the babies are sleeping and all that kind of stuff, probably wasn't like that much, if at all. It's a pretty picture. It makes a really nice nativity scene, but it probably really wasn't all that much like that. I think actually probably the opposite is more true, because most of the people that were either in or near Bethlehem at the time of Jesus' birth were either too busy or too emotionally overloaded or too preoccupied with their businesses to even notice this magnificent, awesome, marvelous event that was taking place right under their noses. They didn't even know it was happening. Very few people actually knew what was happening, and those people only knew it because God told them it was happening, right? So let's take a look at what the Bible says the very first Christmas might have really been like. And today we're just basically going to talk about the innkeeper for just a few minutes and the stuff that surrounds that. But so how about the innkeeper? You know, what does the Bible have to say about the innkeeper? We all have well, I say we all, probably a lot of us have that idea in our head that there was an innkeeper and he turned Mary and Joseph out in the cold because there wasn't room, you know, all those kind of things. But actually there is nothing said about an innkeeper of any kind in the Bible. There's nothing said about an innkeeper. The Bible never mentions an innkeeper at all. As a matter of fact, the only reference that we have is found in Luke chapter 2 and verse 7, which says, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. That's all that's said about an innkeeper or an inn. That she's in a barn because there wasn't any room in the inn. So that's it. Nothing is actually said about any innkeeper or anything else of the kind. And yet there's been a lot of conjecture and, you know, wild stories that have been made up and contrived from this single fact that there was an inn and it was full. And people have taken that and turned it into whole stories and ideas and things, you know. Now, I totally agree that almost certainly, well, maybe not almost, but certainly, if there was an inn, there probably was an innkeeper, right? Okay, I got that. That's okay. You know, however, knowing whether the innkeeper actually literally turned Mary and Joseph out in the cold, or whether he or she, the innkeeper, just, you know, hung this flashing neon sign out front that said, no vacancy, you know. I like this one, too. This one's cool. The cozy cone. The smiling car. The only thing that would make it better is if it says no vacancy and the car was frowning. Right? That's cool. But, you know, I don't know. You know, it may be simply that they were, as they were driving down the street in their Cadillac, pickup, that is, and they saw the sign out front that said no vacancy. It could have been simple as that. Seriously, it could have been simple as that. And maybe that actually is all that happened, is that when they went by the inn, they found out there was no room. It said no vacancy sign hung out front. So the next question then is that either way, let me say this first, either way, the busyness of the town at that particular period of time, that particular moment in time, certainly kept people from recognizing the importance and the significance of what was really taking place in their town right then, because of the busyness and the preoccupation and all those things that were going on. So in order for us to really understand and get a handle on what was really happening, we need to ask this question: why? This is a more important question. Why was the inn full? Maybe we all knew that the inn was full, but why? Well, was there no room in the inn just for them, or was it for anybody, right? Well, depending on the time of year, of course, I think most of you probably know that motels are it's kind of a feast or famine, I think, kind of a business, you know. They're either busting out the seams or they're really hurting for business, one or the other. And usually Christmas time, holiday time of year, Christmas time of year is usually a pretty good time of year for the motels, because people are traveling all over the United States and all over the world and all those kind of things, and everybody needs a place to sleep. So usually motels are pretty busy during that particular time of year. And so that tends to be a good thing. However, in this particular case, in the Bible, Christmas hasn't happened yet, right? So that couldn't have been the problem then. It didn't have to do with Christmas season, because there was no such thing as a Christmas season at that particular time in history. There literally was no Christmas. However, the Bible does tell us that what happened is that Caesar Augustus has sent out this decree that said everybody needs to register in their own town, because we're going to take a census here to find out where everybody's living and who you are and where you're at, those kind of things. Because what he was wanting to do was to impose a tax upon everybody. And he was wanting to be sure that everybody was counted so that he could get all of the taxes that he wanted to get. Sounds like the IRS, doesn't it? They'll spend $400 million to get 1 penny out of you, kind of a thing. They'll chase you down to the end of the world to make sure that you give everything that you're supposed to give if you're not a politician. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Even if it is good. Anyway, but they didn't have any census records yet at that point in time. So every person had to go to their own hometown, and besides that, the computer was broke down on that particular day, So they couldn't do it that way. You had to go to your own hometown to get registered. On the other hand, the reason for the census is because certainly Caesar sure wanted to get all the money that he wanted to come to him. So as a result, and here's what's really, really kind of interesting to me, I find it interesting. As a result, this generally sleepy little town of Bethlehem, this little sleepy little hamlet there in the countryside, was not the old little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie place. It just wasn't. It makes for a nice song, but it wasn't that way. It just wasn't. I got to tell you. It makes for a pretty song, makes for a beautiful Christmas carol, no doubt about that. But it wasn't that way at all. As a matter of fact, this quiet little town in the countryside suddenly became this booming metropolis with enormous crowds of people and all of the animals that they rode in on and all the animals they may have brought with them for, they bring a cage full of chickens so they got something to eat, all those different kind of things. And certainly, I'm almost certain that the Mexican food trucks were lined up along the road like you and I love Mexican food, I'm telling you. Man, and some of the best Mexican food you can get out of some of those food trucks, man. I lived in Anthony, New Mexico for a number of years, and every Friday night and Saturday night for sure, that little town just fills up with food trucks. They're just everywhere. They're on every corner, and they're just full of people. Everybody's down there eating, Well, I would imagine that Bethlehem was something like that as well. With all the influx of people, then they had to eat, and certainly that was a really good time of year for people who were in the food business, right? It only stands to figure. Some years back, I pastored this microscopic little church in a very small town in southern New Mexico called Weed. How many of you have ever heard of Weed? Yeah, some of you have, some of you haven't. Southern New Mexico mountains, Sacramento Mountains, south of Cloudcroft. If you know where Cloudcroft is, about 24 miles south of there. There's a little town by the name of Weed. And Weed actually was founded in 1883 or 84. And it was just a real small town. As a matter of fact, I knew every single person in the town because, to this day, there's 21 people that live in Weed. And 3 miles up the canyon is this bigger city by the name of Sacramento. And here recently, from what I understand, because of the Sacramento Methodist Assembly, which is a Christian camp, there's like 30-something people that live up there now. I mean, it's a huge place, Well, I didn't live at either place. I lived in between for a number of years. And matter of fact, Richard and I lived down, he lived down farther down than I did from Weed, down in McEwen Canyon. And so it was several miles from the booming metropolis of Weed that had 21 people in it. Well, so actually back in the 1870s, Weed was originally called Garden Spot. And the way the name got changed is there was a guy by the name of Weed, last name of Weed, and I believe he came from White Oaks, if I remember right. He came from White Oaks over and established a post office at Weed. Well, with establishing a post office, then that's the Weed Post Office because that's the guy's name. Well, so instead of Garden Spot, Weed was changed to Weed. Garden Spot was changed to Weed then, and it became Weed instead. And and no, it doesn't have anything to do with a bunch of hippies living there that smoke weed. A lot of people think that, but that's not how it gets started. That wasn't it. So because of that, the name automatically got changed to Weed, New Mexico. Well, what's interesting is that while I was a pastor there, of course, it came to the 100th anniversary of Weed, New Mexico, right? And by the way, let me just tell you this. How many of you know who Sam the bartender is on Gunsmoke? You recognize this face? Good. All right, you ought to. If you don't, watch Gunsmoke. What's your problem? Gunsmoke's a great show. A bunch of years it was #1 TV spot. Sam the bartender, which is actually Glenn Strange is his real name, he was born in Weed, New Mexico. Yeah, that's where he was born in 1899. Anyway, in 1883, then a committee was formed. 1883, a committee was formed because they were making plans for the 100th anniversary of the celebration that next year. When time finally came for the big celebration to happen the next year, that small little 21-person lazy mountain town, no motels, no place to stay, a little cafe, and a pump about a gas pump down at the fork of the road, which was really out of town, wasn't even in the town of Weed. We didn't even have a gas station or anything, just a little tiny place there. It literally swelled from the normal population of 21 to at least, I don't know, 800 or 900 people. It was unbelievable. Find a parking spot? I don't think so. Well, I was glad I lived there because there wasn't any place. There just wasn't any place. So it was a really, really busy place for that one weekend during that 100th anniversary. Now, before that day, I knew every person that lived there and every person that basically ever showed up there from the ranches and stuff around about. But, the day of that celebration, I'll be danged if I could find a single person I knew. It was crazy, man. It was just bananas, And I really felt like an outsider because all of these people came there because they had either lived there, born there, whatever, over the last 100 years, And I hadn't lived there but, 6 or 8 or 10 years by that time, or maybe 4 or 5 years by that time. And I was really an outsider. I was a total stranger, So, in the parking, they opened up a pasture down there. Jimmy Goss, some of you know Jimmy Goss. He opened up his 20-acre pasture down the road a little ways, and that just filled up with, cars and, RVs and tents and all kinds of stuff there that weekend. It was crazy, It was just unbelievable. And it was almost impossible to get down that 100-yard stretch of what is Weed, New Mexico, much less find a place to stop anywhere along the way. I'm just glad that I live there, Well, of course, the person who owned the little tiny cafe, the 15-seat cafe that was there, made a killing that weekend. He was busy the whole weekend, right? So for the first time in history then, that's probably exactly what the town of Bethlehem looked like. If you can imagine, for me it's easy to imagine 21 people up to 800 or 900 people over a weekend, and what the difference was there. That's probably what Bethlehem was like at the very moment that Jesus was born. Now, does it sound like the sleepy little town of Bethlehem place that you thought it was? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, busyness beyond comprehension. People and traffic and noise and confusion. Man. Kind of reminds you of trying to do Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve, Traffic and noise and people and everything's picked over, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I'm telling you anything when I tell you that our world is literally consumed with activity today. So much activity, in fact, that there is little, if any, time left over for any kind of reflection or contemplation, much less any relaxation. I mean, that's kind of the world we live in today. And, if you can imagine living in a small town where things are quiet and then have it just boom like that, that's amazing. On the other hand, can you imagine, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, can you imagine if you're a man bringing your very pregnant wife into a town like that at a time like that? It'd be scary. It'd be scary. I mean, if it were me, I'd want the best place for my child to be born, right? I'd be trying to beg somebody, let me pay you 3 times what the room is worth so that if you'll just leave and let me have the room for the night, right? Of course, they'd probably already paid 3 times the price anyway because there wasn't any rooms left, so they could charge whatever they want to, right? That's the way supply and demand works. So, it's not that the people were being mean or inhospitable. And it wasn't that necessarily that Mary and Joseph didn't know anybody there because it's their hometown. But I can tell you from personal experience that everybody that I knew at Weed, I couldn't find a one of them on that weekend out of 800 or 900 people. Unless I went to the cafe and the owner was there. Other than that, so Mary and Joseph aren't purposely being thrown out or pressed out or made to go to a barn to have the baby. It's not any of those kind of things, right? It's just that the place was so full of strangers that there simply wasn't room for them, and they probably couldn't find anybody they knew. Not that difficult. So that tells me something. That tells me that one of the most outstanding characteristics that surround the birth of Jesus is loneliness and fear. Loneliness, man, here you are with your pregnant wife and can't even find anybody you know, much less a place to stay. You finally end up having to stay in the neighbor's barn because that's the only place that's available for your child to be born. And these days, we throw a fit if the child is born at home, not in the, sterile places of the hospital instead, or something, in case something goes wrong. Right? They can fix it. Wow. So the loneliness of not being able to find anybody you know that can help, and the fear that, man, what's life going to bring? What's going to happen? If things don't work out really soon, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to be in trouble. So Mary and Joseph were, basically on their own at this particular point in time. It probably wasn't that they didn't look for help, maybe even for a relative or a friend, but with all the huge crowds that were surrounding it, that filled up that little town, it's impossible to locate anybody. So I know our world can be a place like that, a very lonely place. Even today, it can be a really lonely place. And it's not simply that we don't know anybody that can help, nor is it that we don't have relatives or friends. It's just that life maybe has gotten so busy and there's hardly any time for your own self, much less anybody else, right? And you kind of get into this cocoon thing where you're lonely and you're afraid, man, So let me tell you something right here. Let me tell you something really important right here. I think that that's probably at least one of the reasons why God chose this particular time and place in history to send His Son Jesus to this earth to be born of a virgin. I think that's at least part of the reason why. Because none of us can look back and say, they don't know what it's like to be lonely. They don't know what it's like to be afraid. Oh, yes, they do. I'll tell you what. And Jesus wasn't raised in a place where everything was peace and safety and wonderful either, So I think that God wants you to know, wants us to know, that He is well acquainted with loneliness and the sense of desperation that a lot of us feel. God wants us to know that He understands what that's like, especially at this time of year. Because a lot of people suffer from loneliness and fear and depression and all those different kind of things during this very hustly, bustly, supposedly fun time of year that a lot of people don't see it as that. It's not that way. So is your life absorbed with activity and things and stuff, so that you kind of almost lose sight of the reason for the season? Yeah, well, me too. I got you on that one, I got you. I understand what you're saying. So what's the answer then? I mean, how do you combat that? How do you get around that? How do you see that? Well, the fact that you're present here today or viewing us online is a good indication that you're on the right track. You know, you're looking for answers. You're here. You're saying, you know what? There's got to be something better. That's a really good first step in solving those feelings and problems that we may have within our life. You know, your presence here on this particular day at this particular hour tells me that you have a desire to remember and to celebrate the true reason for the season. Even though our world today, our nation today is trying to put that under the rug as hard as they possibly can. You know, as fast as they can. So what that tells me is that there's a lot of other people out there that are too busy to notice as well. I mean, so what about the clerk, you know, they're behind the counter that's taking your money, or maybe at the bank, or, you know, somebody comes to do work at your house on a Sunday morning, or whatever the case might be, you know, or the person at the restaurant who brings you your food. Well, you know what? I found out that during this Christmas season that when I go into the store to buy something, whether it's groceries or something else, packing up, whatever it is, that I tell the person behind the counter, Merry Christmas. I've discovered something that's really kind of disturbing. I've only had one person so far say Merry Christmas back. They'll say, yeah, thank you. You know? I had one person say, Happy New Year. That was 2 weeks ago. I said Merry Christmas. He said Happy New Year. I think most of the people behind the counter have been instructed not to say Merry Christmas. Maybe they'd like to. They can't. But you know what? If you say Merry Christmas to them, it's going to bring a light to their heart, because they're going to say, man, finally somebody says Merry Christmas. Yeah, I can't say it back, but thank you. You know, yes, thank you. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Yes. I've also noticed that, like Rudy's barbecue over here, where I go once in a while, that they're running actual Christmas music about Jesus and, you know, what Christmas is really about. I've noticed one or two other places in town that are doing that as well. So not everybody is doing the holiday thing, you know, like the holiday programs at school, because you can't do Christmas programs at school. You just flat can't. It's illegal. They won't allow it. Most schools. You can do a holiday program, but you can't sing Christmas songs. You can sing holiday songs that don't mention Jesus, or, you know, things that have to do with real Christmas, you know. So I'm just going to encourage you this morning to just, when you go around the community this week, say Merry Christmas to somebody and tell them, you know, listen, this is about Christmas. We know what it's about. Even if they don't want us to, you know, say so, we know what it's about. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Lord bless you all. Amen. Good job.